Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
So glad you're with us for the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Jim Garrity is away today, and in his place, we're thrilled to have Scott Bertram, the general manager of WRFH, Radio Free Hillsdale, 101.7 FM on the campus of Hillsdale College, where he's also a lecturer in journalism. Scott is also director of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. He's host of the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, among other podcasts connected to the college. And he's the co-host of the Political Beats podcast and co-host of Wasn't That Special, 50 Years of Saturday Night Live. You can subscribe and learn more at wasn'tthatspecial.com. And so Scott is a White Sox fan, so the thoughts of playing October baseball vanished long ago for him. But Scott, we do share affinity for the Bears, and while the schedule has not exactly been torturous so far this year, it's good to have a winning record in the middle of October. We don't get that a lot.
We don't know what that's like. But Jim Nance, who is that guy? Who's that new voice calling a game this weekend with Tony Romo? That never happens.
We'll take it. It's going to get a lot tougher as the season goes on, but definitely looking on the upswing in a very tough division. Today, we've got good, bad, and crazy martinis. And Scott, let's start out west, where the courage and the determination of female athletes at the collegiate level, specifically volleyball players in the Mountain West Conference, need to be commended. This has been an issue, of course, that's happening for a lot of years now with biological men competing in women's sports, most famously Leah Thomas, the swimmer who was very mediocre on the men's team, then declared himself to be a woman, going by Leah, and then became a champion on the women's side. The whole fact that anyone knows who Riley Gaines is stems from that story, but also one of the big parts of that story is how the administration browbeat and bullied the women on that team to not protest anything about him being on the team or having to change in the same location as Thomas and all that sort of thing. So the fact now that these women are standing up in school after school is very impressive. It's happened at Southern Utah University, Boise State University, the University of Wyoming, Utah State, and now the University of Nevada. And it all relates to San Jose State University because there's a transgender player by the name of Blair Fleming. And there's been more than a few highlights of Blair Fleming smashing volleyballs into opponents' faces. It's not quite as dramatic necessarily as the water volleyball scene in Meet the Parents, but it's kind of the same idea. And kudos also to Nevada Governor Joe Lombardo, who is standing up for the student athletes who have now decided at the University of Nevada, we are not playing this game later this month, even though the school has issued a statement earlier in the month saying, oh, yeah, we're going to honor all these games. Don't worry about it. But Lombardo says, as I've said previously, I believe there are competition and safety concerns with this issue, and it's irresponsible for the NCAA to put student athletes in a position of balancing their personal safety against the school's competition and sports they love. The student athletes at the University of Nevada, Reno have determined that they do not want to play against San Jose State, and I wholeheartedly respect the decision of the players. No student athlete should ever be pressured to play a game where they don't feel safe, period. The NCAA has a responsibility to address this issue in a consistent way that protects the integrity of women's sports and the student athletes who participate. And so, Scott, I don't see this issue getting as much national attention as regional attention, although obviously Lombardo getting involved here draws attention to it as well. But at a time when our culture kind of demonizes anybody who doesn't go with the current narrative, it's good to see these young ladies standing up for their rights, and they're just sick of their sports being hijacked by people who don't belong there.
And it's not without consequence. The teams that refuse to play are automatically assigned a loss to forfeit. So it's not right. a decision made without some kind of cost. You mentioned that the college's statement, which came after the players made a statement, and it's kind of a weaselly statement. Players' decision and statement were made independently without consultation with the university or the athletic department. It says the university intends to move forward with the match as scheduled. The players may choose not to take part in the match on the day of the contest. No players will be subject to any disciplinary action for their decision not to take part in the match, which essentially means, I'm sure there's some sort of conference penalty. I would imagine there's some sort of conference penalty if you announce well in advance you have no intention of taking part. Do they say, hey, no, we're going to do this. It's going to happen, unless the players that day decide not to do it. which appears it will be the case when that game comes up. It's a matter of safety and fairness. There are examples, most prominently a North Carolina high school student a year and a half, 2 years ago, who took a spike to the face and had head injuries, neck injuries that still linger to this day. There's a competitive advantage that no matter what was it, Science Magazine or someone a few weeks ago had that piece that said, hey, we can't tell any differences physically between male and female athletes. It's just a mystery to us if one might be better than the other at some sort of sport, which is of course, ridiculous. And there's another side story here. You mentioned it's not getting a lot of national attention. I imagine it will relatively soon if it continues. But I just read this morning that the co-captain on the San Jose State team actually a few weeks ago joined a lawsuit against the teammate, advocating for the disqualification of this transgender teammate. So there's a little bit of controversy, perhaps even on the team itself, as to how this was handled. Apparently, they didn't tell any of the teammates that this player was transgender, so players were rooming on the road with this player. And then after it was made known, they said, please don't talk about this, don't talk publicly about it. They didn't tell any incoming women volleyball recruits that it had a transgender athlete on the team. So there's a lot of disclosure questions here. What's right, what's wrong? And I always am amazed too. The only thing that matters is how the transgender player might feel, right? The feelings of the other players, whether it be teammates or whether it be opposing players, don't really matter, right? You might feel that it's unfair. You might feel that you should only be competing against biological women. You might feel your safety is in danger, but that stuff doesn't matter. The feelings of this one player are paramount in these discussions, it seems. And I think some of these forfeits by D1 college volleyball teams, those players are making a statement. Again, not a statement without consequence. It's an L. It's a forfeit, in hopes of getting a little more attention on this issue.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see whether more public officials like Lombardo stand alongside the athletes who are protesting, or whether the pressure is going to mount for them to stop protesting. Could your scholarships be at risk if you continue to do something like this? But I also think you make a good point that it's not just the teams playing San Jose State that have a problem with this. There are people on the San Jose State team that have a problem with this, and it's just like the UPenn women's swim team.
Yeah. I mean, there were teammates on Leah Thomas's teammates that also had issues as well.
Yes, absolutely right. And so good for the ladies. This isn't easy. There's a lot of pressure on them not to do this, and good for the governor to stand beside them. All right. Well, more good news is Lumen, because look, if you want to get a good handle on your metabolism, get Lumen, the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It measures your metabolism through your breath. Literally all you do, wake up in the morning, take a deep breath, breathe into your Lumen, and it tells you what's happening. Are you burning fat or carbs? And then it gives you tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, workout, sleep, and even stress management.
Your metabolism is your body's engine. It's how your body turns the food you eat into fuel that keeps you going. Because your metabolism is at the center of everything your body does, optimal metabolic health translates to a bunch of benefits like easier weight management, improved energy levels, better fitness results, and better sleep, which I think we all want. Lumen gives you those recommendations to improve your metabolic health.
So if you want to take the next step in improving your health, go to lumen.me/3ml to get 15% off your Lumen. That is lumen.me/3ml for 15% off your purchase. Again, that's lumen.me/3ml. Thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode. All right, Scott, let's move to our bad martini now. And you might remember back at the presidential debate a little over a month ago now between Trump and Harris, the issue of crime came up. And Donald Trump and David Muir got into it over crime statistics and whether crime is going up or crime is going down.
Crime here is up and through the roof. Despite their fraudulent statements that they made, crime in this country is through the roof. And we have a new form of crime. It's called migrant crime, and it's happening at levels that nobody thought possible.
President Trump, as you know, the FBI says overall violent crime is actually coming down in this country. But Vice
Excuse
President
me,
Harris,
the FBI they were defrauding statements. They didn't include the worst cities. They didn't include the cities with the worst crime. It was a fraud, just like their number of 818,000 jobs that they said they created turned out to be a fraud.
Well, the FBI has very quietly revised its crime statistics, and big shock, Scott, things have actually gone up. There was a violent crime increase in 2022 by 4.5%. This according to John Lott at Real Clear Investigations. Initially, the numbers were down, but they hadn't been fully tabulated from 2022, and the actual changes in crimes are extensive. The updated data for 2022 reports that there were 80,029 more violent crimes than the year before. There were an additional 1,699 murders, 7,780 rapes, more than 33,000 robberies, and 37,000 aggravated assaults. And so when it comes to the way the FBI gathers crime statistics, they added a new system. Some cities found it too cumbersome. They didn't comply, so we didn't have comprehensive statistics. And so the administration went with the narrative that crime was actually down, which is not necessarily the case. We'll talk a little bit more about migrant crime in just a second, particularly in New York City. But what do you make of the reality catching up with the statistics here?
Well, we have this happening with jobs numbers nearly every month. We had the big news, I guess it was last month, about a whole bunch of jobs numbers being revised downward, crime numbers being revised downward. One of the big questions is, should the 2023 data be believed, right? When will they revise the 2023 data? Now, going back, John Lott in the story, and John does great work with Crime Prevention Research Center on a lot of gun information and crime information. He talked to an expert who said that they've checked data from 2004 to 2022, and there were virtually no revisions except for 1 year in that big period of time. And then this big revision for 2022. So will that include 2023? Is the new way of reporting? Or I kind of like to think that there was some guy with a manila folder that got, kind of fell between the cracks in the car and then, doing a deep clean. Oops, sorry. 1,700 more murders. It was right here in this folder the whole time, and sorry. This also goes to explain why some of those real-time fact checks are so wrong and so difficult, because stopping someone from making an opposing argument, stopping someone from presenting those arguments he wants to make, or perhaps those facts from a different angle, you wait 2 weeks and all of a sudden things change. So this idea about something that we don't like, something we don't agree with, becomes misinformation. It must be shouted down. It must be countered. And then 2 weeks later, the data shows that crime actually was up in 2022. This, of course, doesn't include unreported crimes. And with migrants in some of the large cities, it's, I think, easy to think that some of those crimes are being unreported. And we also have firsthand experience with a lot of this stuff. If you're in a larger city, you might see things more often. I don't live in a large city, so I can't speak to that. But I know, look at Walgreens just closing down thousands of stores yesterday, the announcement, and many of those are in high crime areas where you have now everyday items being put behind plexiglass, which makes it much harder for people to A, steal, good, but also B, shop, which is bad for stores like that. And that's a reaction to real world circumstances on the ground. And there are violent crimes that are being reported here, but nonviolent crimes also add up. Nonviolent crimes also add to a feeling of being less than safe in many areas across the country. And we see data being revised again in the jobs numbers, data being revised in the crime numbers. So which of these numbers should we actually believe?
And one of the reasons the numbers are up, particularly in some urban areas, is because there's no consequences for committing the crimes. You get arrested, and then literally nothing happens to you. You just get released in some of these no bail areas, the Soros-funded prosecutors. And this was just mentioned up in New York on Fox 5. And Kurt Menefee, who hosts Fox NFL Sunday, is a host also on this show. Who knew that? But nonetheless, they had one of the NYPD detective executives on there, Detective Savino, talking about the mayhem caused by just even one small group of this same Venezuelan gang, Tren de Aragua, that's been causing mayhem out in Aurora, Colorado. A couple different clips here. First of all, he's talking about what they're doing in Times Square.
What started out as a robbery crew, upwards of 50 robberies, 20 individuals arrested for upwards of 50 robberies and out of those 20 individuals, every single one of them is on the streets today.
All of them are still out there. Oh, but wait, it gets worse. Listen to how young these perpetrators are.
There's actually a recruitment process, and this is the first time we've seen structure with Tren de Aragua. Formerly, it was kind of scattered all over the place, but now we're seeing that structure where there's actually kick-ups, where people are recruiting these younger members as young as 11, and they've been described in some of these robbery incidents as young as 8 years old.
8. I've got kids older than 8. I can't even imagine them even contemplating something like that. Yeah, they don't even want to get caught taking a cookie out of the cookie jar. But Scott, I mean, this is what's not only happening, but tacitly encouraged because there's no consequences for committing these crimes.
Yes, I'm trying to dig back into the old archives here because last week there was it sounds like we're back in the 1800s, a great train robbery in Chicago. Train cars on Chicago's west side that were stopped, broken in, and had TVs and all sorts of stuff stolen out of them. And there was a story also last week, actually an op-ed in the Chicago Tribune from an official explaining the consequences of the removal of cash bail across the state of Illinois. And of course, I can't find it here. Oh, here it is, just in time. In the first 50 weeks of the new elimination of cash bail law in Illinois, the first 50 weeks, there were 90,000 cases. Defendants missed court 67,000 times, and that includes defendants charged with violent felonies. So in Illinois now, with the new law, not only are people back on the street, but they're back on the street because there is no more cash bail. They're back on the street and then not responding to their court dates, which seems like another mess waiting to happen.
So no cash bail is basically the domestic form of what's happening at the border. We'll give you this little piece of paper and a date to show up in court that you have no intention of ever showing up for. Yeah. And there's literally no consequences for heinous behavior. It's just insane. All right, I'll tell you what's not insane, though. The deliciousness of the Moink Box that will land on your porch, which you get to order what's in it, by the way. Just got a Moink Box not that long ago. Still the best bacon I've ever had in my life, but you'll also love the steaks, which are huge. Great sized portions. The chicken's fantastic. The pork is fantastic. They even give you desserts. So when you want quality meat delivered right to your door, get the Moink Box.
Moink delivers grass-fed and grass-finished beef and lamb, pastured pork and chicken, and sustainable wild-caught Alaskan salmon. Straight to your door. The difference is a difference you can taste. And you can feel good knowing that you're helping family farms stay financially independent, too. It's your choice. What meat do you get? You let them know. Delivered in every box like ribeyes and chicken breast, pork chops, salmon fillets, and much more. And if you want to, you won't. You can cancel anytime.
I should have mentioned the salmon before. We just had the salmon last week. It was absolutely fantastic. I love the Moink Box. I know you will too. Keep American farming going by signing up at moinkbox.com/martini right now. And listeners of this show get free hot rolls in your first box. They're the best hot rolls you'll ever taste, but only for a limited time. Spelled MOINK box.com/martini. That's moinkbox.com/martini. All right, on to our crazy martini now, Scott. And it could be strategically smart, but I don't know about that. Kamala Harris has a problem with men. That's been pretty obvious for the past several days. And the cringeworthy effort to appeal to men has been very entertaining. We talked about the ad that if you and I were trying to create a Babylon Bee style ad of libs trying to reach out to men but not understanding how to do it, I don't think we could have done any better than the Harris campaign seriously trying to do that. Then there was Tim Walz with the pheasant hunt and struggling to load a shotgun and all sorts of other things. Barack Obama scolding black men for not being more enthusiastic about Kamala Harris. And there's anything men enjoy, it's being scolded for not doing what other people want us to do. And we always respond very positively to that type of motivation. But now Kamala Harris still has this problem, and she's trying to figure out what to do about it. Yesterday, she went on the show with Charlemagne the God. That's the guy that Biden 4 years ago said that if you don't know that I'm better than Trump, then you ain't black. That guy. And so Kamala Harris going on Charlemagne, just another proof positive that Kamala will tell you exactly what she thinks you want to hear. Here's what she told Charlemagne.
So my agenda, well, first of all, on the point of reparations, it has to be studied. There's no question about that. And I've been very clear about that position. In terms of my immediate plan, I will tell you a few of the following. One, as it relates to the economy, which is a lot of what you have addressed. Look, I grew up in the middle class. My mother, worked hard, raised me and my sister, and by the time I was in high school, she was able to afford our first home. I know what it means for an individual and a family to have home ownership.
When she doesn't have notes, she can't get off that crutch of the middle-class family. It's just absolutely hysterical. But now the rumor is that she is considering, or at least many on her staff are pushing her to do an interview with Joe Rogan. Which, Joe Rogan, don't forget, when he moved to Spotify because of his hesitations and misgivings about COVID vaccines and other COVID-related policy, among other things, free speech and, government snooping and that sort of thing, it was like the world ended when Joe Rogan got signed by Spotify. I remember Neil Young told Spotify to take his music off, and then he realized he was losing a lot of money, back. So then he put it back. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But, Joe Rogan was enemy number one because he commanded the biggest, at the time, podcast audience in the world. And now, because they think it might do her some good, although Kamala trying to do a 3-hour interview would be quite something, considering the limited amount of knowledge she has on a number of things. But the fact that now, might help us win. This guy that was absolutely demonized all across the left-wing media and left-wing politicians is now potentially the ticket to a rebound here.
Yeah, okay. So a couple things here. One is, apparently there are some inside the Harris campaign that think doing Joe Rogan would be a really good idea. That would be a great place for Kamala Harris to talk. I got to say, I'm no political expert. I'm not an advisor. I don't get paid anything. I think it would be a humongous mistake. I think what Harris's staff believes is that going on Rogan would be the equivalent of doing Howard Stern. Now, the Howard Stern today is not the Howard Stern of 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Right. Doing Stern now is like doing Stephen Colbert, which is about the most embarrassing thing that you can imagine. I think they think maybe that Rogan would be the same way. Like, oh, he'll like us. This will be a nice, friendly conversation, and he'll complain about SNL and say they shouldn't make fun of you because you're so great, and I really want you to win. And I'm not an everyday Rogan viewer, listener. I've heard enough. Look, he's a curious guy, and part of the reason that show is successful is because he asks good questions. He is more curious than many mainstream media members. And boy, if there's one thing I would not want to expose my candidate to, if I were a Kamala Harris advisor, it's a curious interviewer, because by all accounts, Kamala Harris is not curious and doesn't really have an idea about why she's running, what she wants to accomplish, what she stands for. And the deeper that you get and the more curious a questioner gets, the rougher the conversation is going to be. From my point of view, I'd say do it because it'd be great. But if I were a paid Harris advisor, I'd say don't do it. Don't get close to this thing. I feel, too, like you mentioned the problems with men the campaign has been having, and Jim has a great tweet, X post this morning about Elmer Fudd and Tim Walz, and Tim Walz doesn't know what venture capitalism is, and it's just like ridiculous stuff. It feels like they see the polls and their internals would maybe say that it's worse than we think. Like if they're so desperate, they're going on Joe Rogan's show, who, again, remember, horse pills, and he's going to kill people, and he's a racist, and he needs to be shut down and taken off of Spotify and all that stuff. Now he's fine. They're so desperate they want to do Joe Rogan's show. And Walt's going out and doing that, but at the same time, Kamala Harris is talking about reparations. The campaign yesterday refuses to comment on a report that there's tape from 2019 where Kamala Harris says she wants to criminally prosecute oil companies for climate change. you might want to deny that. Get out in front. At this point, what does it matter? You're on every side of every issue. But you might as well say, no, we don't want to criminally prosecute people who provide our energy for climate change. It feels like now in the last 3 weeks, but voting is open in tons of places, of course, already, that they can't quite identify why things are going wrong, and they can't quite come up with a strategy to turn it around. So we'll try a little bit of everything. And the only real thing they feel is, in those polling numbers, that those men, the numbers among men are really poor. So I guess we got to do something there, but they don't know how. They don't speak that language, and it's a problem. The other problem is the Democratic constituency is so focused on appealing to tiny groups that you have to adjust your message in a little way for each of those groups. And then when you're done, you've said everything and have nothing to fall back on. There's no core, there's no there. And instead of appealing to something really big like men and knowing how to talk to men in the country, they try to talk to these tiny little fragments of a fragment of a population and then forget how to appeal to a wide swath of voters except college educated, single white females, which is the demographic for Harris this time around. I'm not in the prediction game, got out of that a long time ago because I stunk at it, but it just feels to me like it's a campaign that doesn't know how they want to close. They don't know the message. They don't have a great message or a reason for being right now.
No, there's so many smart points there. First of all, the Democrats think you need to appeal to men like they're all like Pajama Boy from the Obamacare ad from back in the day. And then, as Jim has said, the problem's not with the marketing. The problem's with the product. And people thought that before she replaced Biden on the ticket. They might have gotten a little bit distracted by all the glitz and glamour of the convention and so forth. But as time has worn on and she can't avoid interviews forever, people are kind of coming back to the fact that she's pretty much exactly what they thought she was before Biden dropped out. And so the other thing that this whole Joe Rogan episode reminds me of is that the thing that the Democrats hate most, it's not like foreign adversaries, it's not like the crisis at the border, it's whatever is a threat to their power. And Joe Rogan speaking things that they don't want other people hearing was a major threat to their power and still is. I'm sure if she doesn't do the interview, they'll go back to demonizing him in short order. But when you think about who they hate most, it's always the Republican nominee. Doesn't matter who it is. Trumpet's probably more vicious than others. But I mean, they had Mitt Romney giving people cancer and they came up with all sorts of things about John McCain. So even if you're on the much more moderate side of the Republican Party, whoever is the immediate candidate, that's a huge threat. The Supreme Court, anything that's a threat to policies, because the Democrats, for the most part, got what they wanted out of the court until the last few years. And now, of course, it's completely unconstitutional and ethically corrupt and all sorts of other things. And Elon Musk. Elon Musk is now the guy who is the free speech thorn in the side of this administration. And now they're suing him all over the place on completely unrelated things like access to launching pads in California and so forth. And then if they see you as a threat to their power, they're coming after you with both barrels, if they can get it loaded.
A couple of years ago, the headline, I pulled a few of these headlines. Why shrugging off Joe Rogan's use of the N-word is so dangerous. I have a name for what fueled Joe Rogan's new scandal, bigotry denial syndrome. The coronavirus misinformation on Joe Rogan show, explained. So, that's a Washington Post headline. A menace to public health. Doctors demand Spotify puts an end to COVID lies on Joe Rogan Experience. These are all things that they believed less than 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago. They wanted to shut him up. They wanted to take him off Spotify. They wanted to de-platform him. And now they want to use him. And now they want to use his audience to perhaps win a few more votes in Pennsylvania and a few men in Michigan. And it makes you wonder if they ever actually believe those things they said in the first place. Man, just makes you wonder.
Yeah, always subject to change depending on the political circumstances. So, Scott, only 3 weeks and maybe a little more depending on how close some of these states are until we are done with this year's election cycle. But always great to have you with us today. Thanks so much for your time.
My pleasure, Greg. Thanks for the invite.
Scott Bertram is the general manager of WRFM, Radio Free Hillsdale, on the campus of Hillsdale College. 101.7 FM, lectures in journalism there, directs the Hillsdale College Podcast Network, hosts the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, co-host of the Political Beats podcast, co-host of Wasn't That Special? 50 Years of Saturday Night Live. Learn more and subscribe at wasn'tthatspecial.com. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Jim Garrity will be back tomorrow. Thanks for being with us today. Please subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Thanks for your 5-star ratings and kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch Podcast. Follow all of us on X. Scott is at Scott Bertram with just 1 T in Scott. Jim is at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great Wednesday and join us on Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.